you've been hearing, I hope, the importance of measuring things and a genuinely upbeat and positive message about what it is possible for technology to help us achieve. And I'm going to actually take the opportunity to remind us all of why that matters. So this is a pretty lightning tour in some ways of the big trends globally which provide the context within which you are all operating now and you absolutely will be operating in the next 5 to 10 years. Sustainability, single biggest business opportunity of the 21st century. Easy thing to say. I think everybody was surprised when it was Lee Scott from Walmart who said it. And the transformation that that business is undertaking as a consequence of that realization by its chief executive officer is profound. And anybody in this room who does business with any part of Walmart will know that when they ring you up and say, get your carbon footprint down, you do it. Okay, fact one, we've got one of these. We don't behave as if we've got one of them. You probably know the statistics. We're using 1.2, 1.3 planets worth of stuff, which means in business terms, we're eating into capital. That's not a long-term prospect that is supportable. Human society is a subset of the biosphere. We share it, and we share it with other things upon which we depend, and we kind of forget that. But the important thing I want to recognize is that the economy is a subset of human society. In theory, at least, we're in charge of this thing. Now, in practice, the last 2 or 3 years has led me to question whether we're in charge of this thing, but that is the theory. Is it the one we want? Is it fit for purpose? How is it going to be turned to advantage, or is it going to drag us over the edge of a cliff? So there's the little bird, bringing back the second microwave to the house by the coast. Isn't that nice? We have rewarded that behavior really well. We've incentivized it. We've worked out that that drives GDP. That's politically and corporately attractive. We have really not done very well at recognizing the pressure that that activity brings to bear on the supporting branch. We haven't valued it or priced it or costed it, and we are about to pay the price for that failure. September the 25th last year was actually the day in the year when we started using more than one planet's worth of stuff. That date is getting earlier by 2 or 3 days every year as we continue to erode the supporting structures. The print on this is far too small for any of you to see, but you may be able to see little red arrows going down. That suggests that there are a number of supporting processes that we take for granted that are in significant decline. Little things like disease regulation, pollination, pest control, flood regulation, water and air quality. The things that actually we may make assumptions about, but we will discover to our cost, if we don't respect and recognize those, that they will be expensive to do manually or with technology. An example, if you go to China, you can see Chinese farmers up ladders collecting pollen from apple trees, taking it home, drying it, going back up the ladder, painting the flowers because they have run out of bees to pollinate their crops. That's a very, very uneconomic way to grow apples, and that is just an example of the costs about the business and that all of us carry unless we get that right. So take that bubble and remove 98% of it because that's salt. So the fresh water we've got, and I have to say this is where Ireland's soft, gentle rain becomes a real national treasure. The fresh water we've got is 2.5%. And of that 2.5%, 2/3 is locked up in glaciers and needs to stay there because that's 70 meters of sea level rise. So actually, when you take away 98% and you take away the stuff we need locked away, we are not left with very much, and remember, we share it. And we share it with systems and processes that enable us to exist. Now, at 2050, we are getting a bit wobbly because you're making some assumptions about population and you're making some assumptions about water. But the fact remains that extreme water stress does not lead to a peaceful planet, does not lead to a functioning economy, does not lead to all sorts of things. Irish Times last year. Cities running out of water, says expert. Always good to have an expert. But actually the reason that this slide is here is the last line. International bankers have already begun to see a market in water rights in relation to the ownership of rivers and lakes and access to water in the ground. Why am I not reassured by that sentence? What's also interesting is, if you look at other things running out, you've all heard of peak oil, we're going to run out of very odd things, actually. lead, tin, copper, iron ore, steel. And actually, the ones that are really interesting affect the ICT business quite a lot. It's the little things. It's the galliums and the whatever else is, chromium and things. And you're talking about not many decades. And as consumption increases, so the pressure on those natural resources will increase as well. I don't know if anybody has started mining municipal rubbish dumps yet, but it will come. We'll need to extract that stuff and keep it in closed-loop systems because we simply can't afford not to. And what we're seeing, of course, is the population goes up, so there's less land per capita. That's kind of common sense. We try to get round that. We cut down more trees and put soybeans in to grow beef at 3,000 gallons. That's, we do that. But actually, there is a limit to how much land there is, and there is a significant and continuing growing population. Because wherever we put a plough, we start to lose soil. As soon as you take off that natural vegetation, you start to change things significantly. You can see this, another depressing slide. Very degraded is red, degraded soil is orange, stable is, good, stable soil, that's fantastic. Where's the stable soil? The stable soil is right at the top there. Why is it stable? Because it's frozen. But we're fixing that. So we'll get a plough in there and we will turn that yellow bit orange and then red as soon as we can, because that's what the market demands. That's the supply and demand thing. So land and food becomes a premium. So what do if you haven't got very much of either? You go and buy land in someone else's country and grow food for yourselves. Started with the Gulf, the land grab it's called. You must be aware of this, or if you're not, it's an interesting one. They started it, but actually China, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, others are buying land in other countries to grow food for themselves. So you put a fence around. In the case of China, you even send over the farmers. Grow the food, ship it to China, ship it to Saudi Arabia. This one's interesting, not least because the start was to buy land in Pakistan. Well, I wouldn't really want to be the lorry driver driving the food out of a hungry Pakistan in 10 years, 15 years' time, which it will become. The reason why 2 degrees has been identified by the world as a place to stop is this bottom line here. Risk of abrupt and major irreversible change. And this is where they say if you want to see panic, look into the eyes of a climate scientist, because they kind of don't know how to communicate what this is, because they genuinely don't know. They don't know the consequence of letting methane bubble up out of the Siberian tundra, because it's almost beyond the power of the computer to tell us what it will do to ocean currents, what it will do to global temperatures. But it's ugly, and even up to 2 degrees, it's ugly, and there are an awful lot of scientists that say we really shouldn't be going beyond 1. And there are others who say we are now locked into at least 2 degrees, and we're even heading for 3 or 4 unless we do something really radical and dramatic. There has been a real closing of the gap between those peak oil people who say there is a peak of oil coming and the rest of the world that has said you are mad, disenchanted ex-oil company workers. There's less of that rhetoric these days. The chart, oil reserves are so kind of shrouded in commercial and national public interest and secrecy that it's difficult to disentangle it. But basically, in about the 1980s, we started using more than we were discovering. That, for me, is a sort of a tipping point of some sort. And it's partly because we were using a lot more and continue to use a lot more. And if you roll the graphs forward, China's expected increase in consumption meets total global production in about 25 years. So in theory, at least, China will require total global oil production. It won't happen, but it kind of shows that we are looking at the edge of this a bit. BP reckons about 40 years of oil left. Now, that may feel like a long time if you are only looking at the next quarter's results as an analyst, but that does not feel a long time if you have a grandchild, or even if you have teenage daughters. We spend $500 billion a year subsidizing fossil fuels. Surely there must be a better use of $500 billion at a time when we know we should be weaning ourselves off fossil fuels and onto something smarter.